light after the morning. Upstairs, morning came clear and sharp, not soft, not sentimental, just bright enough to show what had already been done. The truck was backed in close beside the diner, tailgate down, boxes stacked carefully. The new mattresses stood upright against the cab, wrapped in thin plastic that crackled when touched. They had been bought plain and firm. Paid for in cash, Margaret had set aside a little at a time. No luxury, just clean starts. The old house was gone now. Not sold, not abandoned, taken down board by board. What could be salvaged had been. What couldn't had been let go. What mattered had been carried forward. Noah lifted the first mattress. The plastic caught the light as he carried it through the side door and toward the enclosed stairwell. The narrow window halfway up the stairs caught the early light and threw it across the wrapped mattress as he climbed. Jack followed close behind, one hand steadying the lower corner without being told. They had built the bed frames weeks ago. Solid wood, cut from Noah's own stock, sanded smooth, joined tight. Temporary, Noah had said when he built them. We'll build better later. But nothing about them looked temporary. Upstairs, the mattress was lowered into place. Noah bent, adjusted it square inside the frame, pressed his palm into the center once. Testing, it held firm. He nodded. Jack stepped back, approval without speech. Margaret came up carrying folded sheets, still creased from the store packaging. Clearance linens, white, simple. She set them on the edge of the bed and pulled the plastic free from the mattress. The crackle sounded loud in the quiet hallway. She folded the plastic carefully and set it aside to be thrown out later. Nothing wasted if it could be helped. She fitted the bottom sheet tight across the corners, smoothed it with the flat of her hand, pulled the top sheet straight, tucked the edges. Practical, efficient, not ceremonial, just necessary. At the foot of the bed lay the quilt Noah had carried out the day after the storm. The old house still standing then, but listing slightly, boards loosened, windows rattled in their frames. He had gone back inside in the quiet daylight, gathering what mattered before anything shifted further. The quilt folded tight against his chest, faded at the corners, hand-stitched years ago. Jack lifted it and spread it across the new mattress. Old weight over new firmness. He smoothed it once with both hands, as if setting something back where it belonged. He opened the top dresser drawer, laid his shirts inside, folded square, set his extra socks in the corner. Then he paused. He reached into the box and pulled out the thin, worn book with the cracked spine. His Gramps' joke book, the cover bent at one edge, pages yellowed, margins marked in pencil, where a joke had once been especially worth remembering. Jack ran his thumb along the edge once, then placed the book in the back of the drawer, closed it gently. Across the hall, the second mattress came up the stairs, Oscar stood back to give space, hands clasped in front of him, eyes following every movement. The mattress was angled through his doorway and lowered into the frame Noah had built. No wobble, no sag, new, firm, clean. Margaret carried in his sheets, shook them open. The fabric snapped once in the air before settling. She tucked them in tight. At the foot of his bed lay the smaller quilt Noah had carried out that same morning after the storm. Brighter once, softened now from years of washing. The stitching along one edge slightly crooked where Margaret had repaired it long ago. She spread it across the bed. Oscar ran his fingers along the seam he recognized. The mattress beneath it was new. The quilt was not. That felt steady. He sat down carefully on the edge. The mattress dipped and rose. He smiled. Not big, just settled. "This is mine," he said quietly. Margaret nodded. "Yes." Noah came up last, with the wooden chest from his boarding house room, scuffed at the corners. Simple, all his years in that narrow, rented space, contained in one box. He carried it into the master bedroom and set it beside the wall. The mattress for that room came up next. He and Jack angled it through the doorway carefully so it wouldn't catch, lowered it into the wider frame Noah had built. Margaret spread the final set of sheets across it. White, unadorned, at the foot of the bed lay the quilt Lois had made for them, wedding ring patterns stitched by hand, circles nested into one another, patient and exact. Margaret had folded it carefully after the reception and carried it upstairs herself. Now she spread it across the new mattress, Lois's work resting over Noah's frame, over Margaret's linens, over a bed built for permanence. The fabric settled smooth beneath her hands. Not borrowed, not salvaged, given. Noah opened his chest, lifted his shirts out one by one, placed them in the empty drawer Margaret had left for him. Separate space, equal space, no flourish, just belonging. By midday, the apartment no longer felt unfinished. New mattresses dressed in clean linens, old quilts resting over them, Lois's quilt anchored at the center, gifted lamps plugged in and glowing softly against fresh walls, hooks hung with coats that had survived the old house. Margaret carried one more item upstairs herself. Wrapped in a dish towel, she unwrapped it carefully and set the framed photograph on the narrow shelf above the small table in the living room. A younger version of herself stood beside her father in front of the diner as it once was, his hand resting lightly at her shoulder, her chin lifted. The frame had survived more than the house had. She set it in place and touched it lightly with her fingertips, not to straighten it, just to feel the glass beneath her hand. Then she lowered her hand and stepped back. In the living room area, the sewing machine sat propped on two sturdy sawhorses, metal body steady, thread already drawn through the needle. Beside it, bolts of fabric were stacked neatly, cottons in soft neutrals, small checks, simple florals, bought on clearance, measured and chosen with care. The new couch would be delivered in 2 weeks. Until then, 2 chairs and a small refinished table stood ready. The fabric would become curtains, tablecloths, cushion covers. Margaret ran her palm across the top bolt once. Tonight, after the boys were asleep, she would begin. But first, dinner, simple leftovers from the last night they had slept in the diner. Roast beef sliced thick, mashed potatoes warmed slowly, gravy stirred back to life. The dining table sat centered beneath Margaret's painting, her landscape framed square on the wall. The horizon in the painting stretched wide and low, more sky than land. Soft early light lay across a field that had not yet been harvested, pale gold bending toward green. A narrow dirt road cut through the center, curving slightly before disappearing toward a stand of trees in the distance. She had painted that road without reference, not copied from a photograph, not borrowed from memory, just imagined. The trees were suggested more than rendered, dark strokes against a washed blue sky. She had never been interested in perfect detail. She painted light, the kind that arrives before noise, before responsibility, before someone calls her name. There was wind in the grasses, implied in the direction of the brush. Forward, always forward. The sky held more color than first glance allowed. Rose near the horizon, lavender lifting into blue. She had layered those tones slowly, deliberately, not to impress anyone, not to display skill, but because she liked the way they settled into one another. She had painted it late at night at the kitchen table once, long before the apartment existed. The boys asleep, the house quiet. It had not been meant for sale, not meant for praise. It was something she had made simply because she wanted to. No mountains, no river, no spectacle, just open land and morning light breaking cleanly through low cloud. Not dramatic, not pleading, certain, the kind of light that belongs to no one else. Jack set the plates. Oscar placed the napkins with exaggerated seriousness. Noah carried the platter. Margaret brought the bowl of potatoes. They sat, steam rising, gravy pooling against white plates. Oscar looked around the table and smiled. "This is upstairs dinner." Jack huffed once. "It's just dinner." Oscar shook his head. "No, it's upstairs." Noah's mouth lifted. "Then we'd better eat it proper." Margaret passed the potatoes. Proper. They ate. Conversation moved easily. Jack told a short, dry joke from his Gramps' book. Oscar laughed too loudly and covered his mouth. Margaret laughed anyway. Noah leaned back and listened. Relief lived in the room. Not dramatic, just quiet. No one lingered when the plates were cleared. Routine followed them upstairs. The boys brushed their teeth. Margaret sat at the sewing machine, the lamp beside her, casting a warm circle of light. She fed the first length of fabric beneath the needle. The machine began to hum. Upstairs, doors opened and closed. Noah moved down the hallway. A window latch clicked. Good night. Sleep well. Another door. Good night. Sleep well. The doors closed completely. The sewing machine hummed steadily. Noah returned to the living room. "You'll be up late," he said quietly. "Yes," she answered. He stepped behind her, brushed his lips against her neck. "It'll wait." The sewing machine continued to hum for 2 steady stitches before her foot lifted from the pedal. The needle slowed, stopped. The fabric rested beneath her hands, half fed through. She did not turn immediately. His mouth remained at the curve where her neck met her shoulder. Not urgent, not claiming, just present. The warmth of his breath settled there first, then the press of his lips again, softer this time, deliberate. Her fingers tightened slightly against the cloth, not to pull away, just to anchor herself. The house was quiet. Closed doors down the hallway, a lamp burning low behind her, the faint scent of cotton and machine oil in the air. His hand moved to her waist, not gripping, resting, calloused palm against the small of her back. He did not pull her from the chair. He waited. Margaret closed her eyes, only for a second, long enough to feel the years behind them. Storms, boards carried, coffee poured before dawn, receipts counted at the counter, long after closing. She had stood alone in rooms before. She was not standing alone now. Her breath shifted, deepened. She turned slightly in the chair, just enough that his mouth brushed the line of her jaw. He kissed her there, slow, unhurried, as if there were no one left to impress and nothing left to prove. The sewing machine sat silent between them, threads still drawn tight, fabric waiting. His fingers curled gently into the fabric of her sleeve, not to restrain, only to steady. "Margaret," he said quietly, not as a question, as recognition. She turned fully then, rose from the chair. The fabric slipped from her lap and pooled softly at her feet. They stood close, close enough that the warmth between them felt undeniable. Her hands came up, not dramatic, not trembling now, and rested against his chest, solid beneath her palms. Real. He lowered his forehead briefly toward hers, not touching, just there. A pause, a breath shared. Then he took her hand, not hurried, and led her down the hallway toward the bedroom. The living room lamp remained glowing behind them. On the bed, centered neatly atop Lois's quilt, sat a small wooden jewelry box, dark walnut, polished smooth, brass latch catching the light. Margaret stopped, her breath caught. "When did you have time to make this?" "Bits at a time." She reached for it with trembling hands. He nodded. "Open it." She lifted the lid, turned the small key. A soft click, then music began. Sweet, delicate, a simple melody that filled the room without overwhelming it. The first notes were light, almost shy, as if testing the air. Margaret's fingers remained curved around the edge of the lid. She did not move. The sound settled into the quiet of the room and seemed to soften it. Noah watched her rather than the box, watched the way her shoulders lowered, the way the tightness she carried so often in her jaw eased without her knowing. The melody wound carefully through the space between them. Not grand, not ornate, just steady, like something meant to be played in a room where voices were kept low. Margaret looked down into the velvet lining, her reflection faint in the polished wood. "You made this," she said, though she already knew. He gave a small nod. For upstairs, the words were simple, but they held weight. She lifted her gaze to him. The music continued, thin and bright and certain. Her hand slid from the lid to his wrist, not clinging, just anchoring. The lamp in the living room cast a warm spill of light through the doorway behind them. The house quiet, the melody threading through it, and neither of them hurried it. The lamp in the living room still glowed. The boys' doors remained closed. The melody rose softly between them, and that is where the night held them. Morning came gently, blue light slipping through the enclosed stair window before the sun had fully risen. Margaret woke first, the quilt heavy, the music box closed on the dresser. She rose and stepped into the hallway. Both boys' doors were closed. She opened the apartment door and stepped into the enclosed stairwell. Cool air met her. A narrow window, halfway down, framed the street in early blue light. She paused there, hand resting lightly on the rail, looking down at the quiet town below. Then she continued. She unlocked the diner door, moved through the dim room before turning on lights. Coffee measured, water poured, steam rising. Noah's steps sounded on the enclosed stairs. He slowed briefly at the window as well, then entered. Morning, morning. Jack came next, paused at the stair window, measured the distance between upstairs and down, then descended. Oscar pressed his palm briefly against the glass as he passed. He looked at the dark sign. Not yet, not yet. Margaret stepped to the front window, saw her reflection faintly in the glass. Apron tied, ring catching light. Noah behind her, Jack near the door, Oscar small and steady by the counter. She flipped the switch. A hum, a flicker, then the red letters warmed to life. Open, bright in the window. Steady, certain. The bell above the door rang as the first customer stepped inside, and the day began again.